If you're living life and you're feeling burnt out, you don't need some new secret morning routine, some guru hack that's going to help you get out of being burnt out. What you need in life are fewer things demanding time from you, sucking that energy out.
Welcome to Under Pressure, the podcast about becoming better men when it counts. I'm Cody Laughlin.
And I'm Brian Alfaro. Each week, we have honest conversations about building businesses, leading families, carrying responsibility, and the pressure that comes with trying to do all of it well. If that sounds like your world, you're in the right place.
No hype, no pretending we've got it all figured out, just real stories, real struggles, and what we're learning along the way. Let's get into it.
Before we get started, if today's topic resonates with you, you'll probably enjoy The Forge. It's our free weekly newsletter where we share lessons, stories, and practical ideas around business, family, responsibility, and becoming better men. You can join at forgingbettermen.com. Now let's get into it.
So Brian, there's been moments in my life, my adult life, where I've been going through the daily routine, work, family, all the things. And from the outside, I've appeared totally normal, totally fine. You couldn't tell that something was bothering me, but internally, I wasn't okay. And I was really struggling and battling internally with a lot of exhaustion. And it's played a major impact in certain segments of my life to the point where it's affected not only myself, but the people around me, my wife, my family. You know, I've gotten to a point where sometimes you feel like you can't give anymore.
When you're feeling those moments, Cody, and you're living it and you're breathing it in that exact moment, did you actually think to yourself or feel like you're burnt out?
At the time, no. At the time, it was more making excuses for why I was feeling the way I was feeling, or just trying to tell myself, suck it up,
Tough up? Yep.
keep pushing through. Hindsight's always 20/20, but at the time, I didn't recognize it as burnout, but ultimately, that's what it ended up being.
So let's talk about that today, Cody. In today's episode, there's a lot of people that are feeling the same thing that you're feeling. And how do you tell when you're tired just from living everyday life as an adult man versus actually being stressed and burnt out? Let's talk about that topic today and how you can navigate it. So you made an interesting point, Cody, a minute ago when you were talking about on the outside, everything looked fine. You were getting your stuff done. You looked productive. Your wife might have not even been able to tell that you were actually, burnt out. And I think that's a key thing to talk about is that a lot of guys walk around, they live their life, they live the day to day, they're pushing through, they're grinding, they're sucking it up, toughing it up, whatever you want to call it. But on the inside, they're actually really burnt out.
And what happens is, for me, at least in my experience, burnout doesn't happen overnight. It develops over time, especially when you're so accustomed to pushing and pushing and pushing and just revving the engine at full throttle. And I look at the mind and the body as the engine in your car. Your car is only designed to be able to handle a certain amount of RPMs on a normal average day usage. But, you have that red line portion that if you start getting to that red line and you start pushing too hard and try to sustain there, eventually the engine breaks down. And that's how our mind and body works. And that's exactly how that happened to myself is, again, where you're burning the candle at both ends. You're going through the daily routine. You're pushing with everything you've got. You're giving your full 100% effort into everything, job, family, entrepreneurship. And what ends up happening is, for me, I started to get to the point where I couldn't even recognize myself anymore. And I started to lose that drive. And what's interesting is I think what happens often is the same drive or the same energy that propels us to give our all to, again, our jobs, families, businesses, whatever, is the same energy that can also exhaust us and lead us to that burnout.
Yeah, men often look at exhaustion as a sign of weakness. And you and I know, because we've been in those moments, we've felt those moments of exhaustion, and you just tell yourself, just keep pushing, just keep pushing. That's life, just suck it up. But when you do that for too long, when you push, to your point, using the car analogy, when you rev the engine too long, too hard, too fast, we all know what happens to that engine. It burns out, it dies, it catches on fire, it explodes. And that's what happens to us, but it happens on the inside. We go full throttle, we do it for too long, we don't recharge our batteries because we feel like that's a form of weakness.
Mm-hmm.
Like slowing down, living life, enjoying it, making time for yourself to actually recharge your batteries. A lot of guys think that's weakness and that you should always be going pedal to the metal full throttle, because that may be, to your point, what got them to their level of success right now. Maybe they were young and they worked really hard. They put in, 100-hour work weeks. They didn't have a family at the time. Their body was much different. And now they're 10, 15, 20 years older, and they're assuming that that same recipe for success can still be applied today. And you and I both know, me approaching 40 and you, a fresh 40-year-old, I should say, you and I both know that that's just not true anymore as your body tends to age.
You seem to keep calling me out for 40. You're going to be there soon, buddy. Don't worry.
I got to let the world know.
Karma's coming around.
It's coming, man. It's going to hit me hard, too.
But you're absolutely right. And I think, Brian, part of that, too, could be an ego thing for us as men, because I know you've heard me say this time and time again in our past. The bragging of how many hours you put into work or how many hours you put into your business and maybe how much money you make. There's all these different ways that you measure how hard you're working. And it's just, all it is, it kind of inflates your ego in a way, because you're trying to measure yourself up to other people. And I know we've talked about that in prior episodes, but to your point, the reality, all you're doing is masking the internal exhaustion that you're feeling, just trying to prove yourself to other people in a way sometimes. And I've definitely been guilty of that myself.
Yeah, we also have a culture being busy in our society today. Think about yourself when you interact with somebody maybe you haven't seen in a while. What do you say? Like, how are things? How's it going? Busy, busy. And people are like, busy's good. Busy's good, right? And as a guy, we feel that pressure even more to stay busy because we want to your point, it's kind of a pride symbol. If you're busy, that means, or people assume, I should say, people assume that you're doing well because you're busy, but that busyness can become a form of exhaustion. And that exhaustion is what tends to lead to burnout over time.
Mm-hmm. And I know for me, when I started hitting that point of exhaustion, like I mentioned a minute ago, I started to not recognize who I was anymore. I started to lose that same positive energy that I always seemed to carry. I loved being around people. I loved just being energized to go and give it my all every day. And I lost that. And I started to find myself personally getting to the point where I didn't want to be around others. I didn't want to engage with anybody in any given particular time. I would wake up angry often, and I'd get really short temper and just really irritated by the littlest things, something that didn't even matter. But just because you just don't have any more mental capacity to respond in any way other than just lashing out. It was just trying to isolate yourself. I've never been depressed at all, and I don't know what that is, but if I could imagine somebody that has to deal with depression, it kind of almost feels like that, where you feel so alone, you just feel so isolated, you don't want to be around anybody or anything. And I got to that point. And I got to that point where just mentally, I didn't have any mental space or capacity to give to anything else. And it started to affect me physically. Like, I would lay in bed physically sometimes for days, just like after a shift at the hospital or, a tough day doing whatever in business. Like, I'd sit there in bed sometimes 2-3 days and just completely disconnected. And my wife, I remember at one point, she was worried about me. She was like, "Man, like, what's going on with you? You don't want to go do anything. You don't want to go hang out with anyone or go anywhere. You sit around and just lounging around all the time." And I felt the impact of her words, but it didn't really matter at the time, just because I was just like, I don't care.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you make. And I've been in that situation too. And it's hard to catch yourself in the moment, I think. But you're burned out when things that you typically enjoy, you no longer enjoy. Or maybe a job you've worked for a while starts not being fun anymore. You don't look forward to going to work. Now, not everybody loves to work. You and I maybe like to work a little bit more than the average person per se. But generally speaking, if there's something in your life that you typically enjoy doing and you don't enjoy doing that anymore, especially if it gets especially if it's a dangerous area of your life. And by dangerous, I don't mean that in a bad way, but imagine if you're burned out and you don't enjoy being with family, or you don't enjoy being with your kids because you're too tired. You don't enjoy being with your spouse because you're too tired. If you're feeling that point of exhaustion and burnout, that those things that really matter in life, the assets that are most valuable to you in life, you're no longer enjoying the time you're spending with them, that's when you know you have a problem and you've gotten past the point of just being tired, right? Because we start off by just being tired, and we're tired, we're always tired, right? And then tiredness moves into exhaustion, and that's when you start feeling that feeling of not enjoying relationships, not enjoying being around your kids, not enjoying work, not enjoying hobbies or interests, maybe like working out, just playing sports or whatever. And, being tired and wanting a break is okay, but feeling like you're exhausted and you're no longer happy doing the things you love doing, that's when we have a problem.
And to that point, Brian, I've been around fitness professionals my entire adult life. I mean, actually through my teenage years in sports. And I've been around, obviously, healthcare workers in my W-2 career. And the general theme from fitness professionals, healthcare professionals is listen to your body. If you're having pain or you're having discomfort, your body's telling you something like, hey, something's not right. And to your point about being tired, to me, that's an extension of that. That's also your body saying, hey, the battery is empty. We're running on E. And as you mentioned earlier, it's time to recharge. But for me, my experience with burnout happened probably in my later 20s, almost 30 years old, 10 years ago, Brian. But there's, again, maybe it's ego, maybe it's the way I was raised, but in your 20s, those were the years where I was just telling myself, no, you
keep pushing,
just keep pushing, just keep pushing, just keep pushing, and found those excuses and reasons of why I should keep pushing. And unfortunately, I didn't realize until after the fact that, that was my body telling me like, hey, recharge, stop, and I didn't catch the warning signs in time.
To your point, Cody, about pushing more at a younger age, more hours don't necessarily mean more output, right? There's a difference between activity and productivity. And we miss that point sometimes when we're young because we don't understand the difference between the productivity and the activity side of things. So at the end of the day, what ends up happening is we end up working more, accomplishing less.
Mm-hmm.
We end up getting brain fog. We end up just becoming unproductive because we're physically working, we're clocked in or punched in as so to speak, but our mind is somewhere else. So we're just heavily distracted, or we're just not in the game. We're not in the moment. We're not focusing on producing our best work possible because we're mentally exhausted.
Yeah, it's like you're just going through the motions and just checking the boxes, so to speak. But then, like you said, you're not giving it your best effort because you're not the best version of yourself. And it's hard to realize that at first, because in those moments where you still are fatigued and you're still pushing, you're telling yourself, well, I'm still getting up and I'm going to work. I'm still getting up and I'm doing all the family things. Again, until you really step back and really reflect on it, in those moments, are you really being the best version of yourself at work? Are you really giving your all? Are you really being the most productive, as you mentioned, with your family? Are you giving your family the right attention, the right intentful emotion, so to speak, or your undivided attention? Are you giving them your full heart? And it's hard to see that when you're so fatigued and exhausted. You're just blinded almost.
Yeah, you get diminishing returns on all the activities you do without even realizing it. You might be there putting the time and effort in, but the fruits of your labor tend to drop over time because, as you said, your heart's not there, your soul's not there, your mind's not there, your body's there, but you're not all in it.
And I think that's where that isolation piece starts to kick in as well. Because when you start to feel like, I just don't have any more to give, but the people around you are still demanding the same, the full version of you.
Oh yeah, your kids and family don't slow down.
They don't slow down.
Yep.
They don't see the internal struggle, and I would argue that they deserve the best version of you, right? But if you're in that moment and you're in that state and you just can't give it, you start to build up a defense mechanism. You start to build up a wall almost, and you almost purposely start to isolate yourself just because you're trying to pull yourself back and in a way separate yourself from those external pressures, but you just create this isolation for yourself, and it's very hard to get out of that. It's a very lonely feeling too.
Yeah, no, I know I've definitely had that feeling, especially looking back at late last year when I kind of left a corporate W-2 position and decided to go out and do my own entrepreneurial thing. A part of that reason is what you mentioned. I was feeling burnt out. I wasn't enjoying what I was doing. A variety of factors at play there, but at the end of the day, it was really impacting my mental health. It was impacting my sociability with my friends, my relationship with my wife, where she was like, "Are you okay?" Like, just kind of asking me, "Are you okay? You don't seem like yourself. You don't seem happy." And I thought at first it was me, and like the answer was just like more isolation, more time by yourself, kind of keeping your distance, staying away from people. But you end up learning that that actually usually isn't the answer, because if something you're doing or the time you're putting into something is burning you out, just sort of isolating yourself and telling yourself you're going to get away from it isn't always the resolution.
Yeah, it's almost like you convince yourself that isolation is a form of recovery when you're in that state of burnout.
Right. So, Cody, all these things we're talking about, I think they're the signs that a lot of men end up ignoring. But let's talk about how to identify what's actually burning you out. I think that's the challenge that a lot of people have. They may feel tired, they may feel exhausted, they may feel stressed. They might even realize, like, man, I'm feeling kind of burnt out right now. But they may not be able to pinpoint exactly what it is that's causing that burnout, because it may not be a thing that's the most obvious thing to you. So let's talk about some options there, right? Maybe it's your workload. A lot of guys in particular tend to put too much on their plate. I am exhibit A. I'm the guy who will spin too many plates sometimes, just have a hard time telling people no. Sometimes it's something I'm constantly working on. But when you fill up your plate too much and you say yes and you end up having this massive workload, you may be moving the needle, you may be making progress, but there's something mentally exhausting about knowing you've got all these things that you need to be doing, but time does not allow you to get to them. That alone in itself can cause exhaustion mentally, thinking like, man, I need to work on project A, but today I'm focused on C, D, E, and I'm not going to have time to go to work to B. And now you're thinking about it and you're all stressed out. But now you're having to spend more time when your workload's too full outside of normal hours of what I would say working. The human body, the mind, the spirit, we need to recharge our batteries. And our society, talking about culture and norms now, it's very common for you to have an excessive workload. 30 years ago, before cell phones, when you left work, you usually left work. There were no emails. There were emails, but people weren't, it's not the same as today. There were no text messages. Again, they had them, but maybe they weren't the same as today. When you left the office for the day, you actually genuinely got to go home, enjoy time with your family, and recharge your batteries and wake up the next day. But now we live in this society where it's very, very hard to disconnect. So if you're not careful, you can take that heavy plate, that heavy workload you have with you home every day. And it's one of those things like it never turns off. You're always thinking about it, right? You're always thinking about that workload. And that in itself can burn you out.
And if you think about people that are our age, you're in the same category as me, sir. But people our age, we grew up in this era of having that technology readily available at our disposal. We grew up in work environments where that was the expectation, whether we wanted it to be or not, where you are accessible at any given point in the day. And to your point, we're capitalists at heart. We believe in the capitalist system, but one of the downsides of capitalism is you really have to work many hours, long hours. You have to work very hard to really put yourself in a position where you can separate yourself from the rest of the average everyday American that are just doing the regular 9 to 5. And I think that's a natural, like when we talk about taking on too many responsibilities, I think it's just a natural reaction function for us as men. We, for some reason or another, just convince ourselves that we're Superman and we can handle all of it. We can carry the burden of all these responsibilities. And we also lie to ourselves and tell ourselves like, I can multitask, sure. And the reality is you cannot be effective at doing too many things if your plate is overloaded. And then you start talking about what really fills the tank, quote unquote, what really drives you and motivates you and really inspires you to be the best version of yourself every day. If it's just filled with more tasks and more responsibilities and not necessarily things that actually fulfill you, then all of these juggling of responsibilities and different tasks, and it will come crashing down very quickly. It will lead you to that point where you're just so mentally exhausted that you don't recognize yourself anymore.
Yeah, I think multitasking is one of the biggest lies we've been trained and ingrained to believe it's true. You can't be really good at doing 10 things.
No, you cannot.
And our society now is built that way. I mean, you can open 10 different browser tabs and we have 2, 3, 4 screens going on. And we're told multitask, thinking that it is going to increase the quality of the work. Well, back to my point, you may be increasing your activity, but you're not increasing your productivity. And, to what you were saying about technology and our sort of knack for multitasking, that drive, that constant idea of like, I can be spending time with my family and checking emails. Right. That's where things get really dangerous and you don't disconnect from that heavy workload you have. You don't get to recharge your batteries. And again, we're talking about what leads to burnout. That's definitely one of the options.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I think is really important to mention is every open space you have in your life cannot be another space that you just fill with work. We just talked about that, right? In the sense that now I have some extra free time. Well, maybe I'll just go do a little bit of work. I have been the biggest, biggest person like sort of breaking that rule where, especially when I was young and I was trying to get ahead in my corporate career, it's a Saturday, it's midday, maybe my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, wasn't around or I was just by myself. I'm like, I'm just going to work 2, 3, 4 hours of work. Before I know it, I've spent half my Saturday working. Well, that becomes a very common norm and you pick up that habit. Well, you start to do that as you get older. You see like, oh, I have a few minutes. I'm going to check my emails. Oh, I have a few minutes. My wife left. Oh, I'm going to get some work done. Well, that can get really dangerous really fast if you're constantly trying to fill every moment in life you have with some sort of productivity, some sort of multitasking, some sort of hack. It is really, really challenging for the average adult person today to just learn how to sit quietly, be silent, and enjoy the moment. We constantly feel like we have to be doing something. And when we constantly feel like we have to be doing something, we tend to fill the empty spaces in our life. That's what leads to burnout.
And Brian, I didn't learn this until probably my mid-30s. No matter how much effort, time, work that you put in to whatever your job, your business, you cannot solve every problem in every given day. No, you cannot outwork the mountain of problems that you're going to have on a day-to-day basis. It's impossible. It will not happen. And I think what you're alluding to me is that feeling of needing to fill every space with something that's work-related or something that's productive. It may give you a temporary satisfaction knowing that I'm giving it my all, but what happens tomorrow? When the next problem's there or when the next task is there and there's still more work to be done? What happens the next week when there's still a mountain of things to do? I think it's important that we accept the fact that no matter how hard we work, tomorrow's just going to bring a whole nother set of challenges that we have to be prepared for. And if you can't be of sound mind and if you can't be energized and have a full battery to take on the next day, you're no good to yourself or the people that you're trying to serve or help.
Absolutely. Cody, we're talking about identifying what is actually burning you out. The other thing I want to talk about from experience is that sometimes burnout doesn't come from necessarily the amount of activity you're doing, working too much. Sometimes it comes from no longer enjoying and being misaligned with what you're actually doing in life. And I went through that season sort of last year where I was doing something, working for a company, and it was really hard to explain why I was burnt out, why I wasn't happy. But something inside me just said that there's some sort of misalignment here. It was no longer a fit for me. It didn't make sense for me to be here, regardless of what was happening at the company, good, bad, ugly. Things could have been amazing. Things could have been bad. Something inside told me like, this is no longer a fit. And I think if you're in that situation and you're trying to do something and kind of work your way through it and push through it. This is what guys do. We try to push through things, work harder. You tell yourself, oh, it's just me. It's just a season I'm going through right now. It'll be fine. Well, a month becomes 6 months, 6 months become a year, years, turn 3, 4, 5 years. And before you know it, you've been burnt out for a really long time because you're doing something that in your heart, in your gut, in your soul, in your mind, you know that this is no longer an alignment. It's no longer a fit for you.
And highlighting a point you made earlier, ignoring those signs, that's a sign of weakness. being able to recognize when you're starting to misalign or you're starting to maybe disconnect from who you really are, that's where I think maturity really comes in, because recognizing that and getting ahead of it and really taking that time you need to address whatever the underlying issue is that's causing you to feel that way is exactly what will help prevent you from getting to that state. And I think it's a critical skill set to develop, and it's not something that comes natural for us as men, but I do think it's something that we definitely have to recognize and constantly strive to work on, and quit telling ourselves that we have to be Superman. We can't show vulnerability, or we can't show that we're at a point where we're tapped out. That's nonsense. That's you telling yourself that, but we all know that that's not true.
Cody, a lot of men are just carrying too much alone. Husband, father, entrepreneur, somebody who takes care of the family, taking care of your parents. None of these people that we're talking about, they know you're struggling. They don't know you're going through something. They don't know you're sad or depressed, or maybe you're burnt out. So to your point, I just think as men, we have to get better at sharing those types of things and talking to the people around us, because we have a much bigger, better support system than we realize. There are people there who love for us and care for us, and we don't have to carry that burden alone. You just use the term Superman. Every guy tries to be Superman. We try to carry all this weight, the burdens that come with being a man, and the good burdens, not bad. Like,
Sure.
we love the burdens that are being a dad, being a husband, being a father. Those are burdens. Those are weights we love carrying. We'll take those any day of the week. But when we're carrying all that alone and we don't share what we're going through with the people in our network, the people that are supporting us, with the church, with friends, having conversations like this, just open and honest conversations, and we go into our little bubble, or we kind of crawl into a space and say, oh, I'll just muscle through it alone. That's when things tend to get worse.
Mm-hmm.
They don't tend to get better. So I just think we have to stop and realize we're not alone, and we need to share these experiences that we're going through with other people around us.
Oh, definitely agree. I mean, that's the inspiration behind the show. That's why we're here 20 something episodes in having these conversations. And how many times did you and I have conversations before the concept of the show, and we were sharing our stories and our challenges, and we realized, well, man, it's not just me. It's not just me that's going through this. You start to understand that there's other people that are going through struggles that can relate to how you feel or what you're going through. And that can, as you mentioned, be that support for you. And that's a relief. I mean, it really feels good to know that, man, somebody understands where I'm coming from, or somebody really understands what I'm going through. And it's a relief to understand, man, what are the tips that you use to battle through this? How did you get out of this feeling of burning out, and how did you get back to being yourself? It's great to know that there's other people out there that can be that support person for you. You just have to be willing to accept it. And I think, again, that goes back to that ego thing that we have and I think it's a natural thing for us as men. For some reason, we just have that internal wall that we've just genetically been cursed with. But I do think that ultimately we have to be willing to accept and be open to that. Like you mentioned, it really makes a world of difference for you, for your health and mental health in particular. So Brian, with that, I think it's important that when we get to this stage of burnout, or we talk about the burnout, it's important to find the reset. You got to hit the reset button, because you can't live in that state in perpetuity, or else your whole life will come falling apart. The world, unfortunately, does not stop just because you're feeling exhausted.
Nope.
Unfortunately, we got to be able to hit the reset button. So let's talk about that. And I think it starts by relabeling the term or phrase, I'm burnt out, and really starting to define what it is that is actually causing the burnout, what it is that is causing the exhaustion.
Yeah, I think identifying what's draining you and actually giving it a name, what specifically is taking more from you than it actually gives you, is definitely step one in identifying what's burning you out. Now, there are a lot of things that could burn you out in life. And some things that I would argue too, we haven't really talked about this. There are things in life that will burn you out, but it's actually sort of healthy. A newborn baby will burn you out.
I was sitting there when I was like, wait,
I'm speaking from experience here, right? So like having a newborn baby in that first few weeks, the first few months, those types of things, they can burn you out.
Mm-hmm.
starting a company from scratch and kind of getting it off the ground, that really heavy lift you have, sometimes it burns you out. But I would call that intentional burnout. You know it's coming, you know it's going to happen. You can prepare for it, your family can prepare for it, your spouse can prepare for it. But what we're talking about here are those other things in life that may be taking more from you than they're actually giving. Sometimes it might be work. Maybe, yeah, it puts food on your table, pays your bills. But if work is taking more from you personally and leaving you empty and leaving you sad and leaving you burnt out more than it gives back to you, not just the money it gives you, then you have to reassess, how much am I working? What am I working on? Am I taking too much work home? But identifying what is actually burning you out, not just running around saying, oh, burnt out. Well, okay, well, what does that mean? It's like when people say, well, I'm tired. Well, what are you tired of? You can't just be tired. What is actually making you tired? Getting to the root cause and symptom versus just saying, hey, I'm burnt out. That's definitely something that can help you escape that actual burnout feeling.
I agree, Brian. And we've talked about this in prior episodes, but I think one good exercise related to this topic is actually writing down and mapping out your entire calendar for the week, or the days of the week, and what are you filling your time with every single day, and be honest with yourself. I spend 12 hours at work and I spend 3 hours at home doing XYZ. I think it's important that put your time spent on paper and really look at it and reflect on, where are you filling your time and energy, and really evaluate how much of that time and energy is being spent on the things that you truly care about, or that really, like I said, that really fill your tank. And if the scale is lopsided one way or the other, then it's time to make an adjustment. If the scale is flipped to where you're just, all of your time and energy is going to those things that are just draining you, then it's time to make an adjustment and time to take a change so you can tip the scale back in your favor.
If you're living life and you're feeling burnt out, you don't need some new secret morning routine, some guru hack that's going to help you get out of being burnt out. What you need in life are fewer things demanding time from you, sucking that energy out. We've heard the saying, addition by subtraction, right? That's exactly what we're talking about. What you're talking about, sit down, map out your week, map out your calendar, be honest with yourself and look and see, what am I doing right now? Where am I actually spending and investing my time? And more importantly, what can I stop doing? What can I delegate? What can I postpone? What can I pass on to another employee or somebody in my circle that I don't have to be doing anymore? Maybe even only temporarily, just so you can get your energy back and recharge. But doing less is often the secret to getting out of burnout. You just need to stop burning yourself out by doing too much.
Yeah, quit saying yes to everything.
Exactly.
I mean, no is the most powerful word in the English language, and particularly when we're talking about this, is you have to be able to learn to say no and put up those walls and protect your time and energy, so that way you can start subtracting those things and pulling those things out of your schedule that take you away from being the best version of yourself. And I think it's so important. Like you said, you can do so much more with less if you were willing just to turn away and say no to so many more things.
If you're trying to get out of burnout, you have to learn to recover without feeling guilty about it as well. Rest is not a reward for finishing everything. I've been that person where I'm like, I got to push through, and then I get to rest. It's sort of like the reward we give ourselves for accomplishing all these things, multitasking, doing all these things we said we are going to do for the day. But if we look at rest as a reward for doing too much, we're never going to get to rest, because to your point, there's so many things that we could be doing at any given point. And as men, we tend to fill our calendars even when there is room to breathe, there is room to rest. We tend to add more stuff. My wife makes fun of me all the time because I sometimes have a hard time sitting still. I'll have a few minutes, a break, and I'll be running around the house, cleaning something, doing the dishes, doing the laundry, doing something outside with the landscaping. She's like, can you just sit down and relax for a moment? But as guys, we tend to want to fill the space, fill the time naturally, right? But we need to learn that rest is not a reward for finishing everything. We need to bake that rest into our schedule. You were talking about scheduling things out earlier. We were talking about removing things. Well, if you remove something from your schedule and you have an empty space there, if you have that itch to fill it with something, fill it with the word rest. Literally write rest in your calendar and do absolutely nothing during that time so you can recharge your batteries.
Totally agree. And there's so many studies out there that just show everything from just a full 7-8 hours of sleep at night the benefit that gives you and the increase in your physical and mental health, the impact that that has. And then when you talk about rest, I mean, studies that show if you can only absorb so much information within a short window of time. So if you're sitting at a desk all day, just completely inundated with data and information, by the end of 45 minutes, your brain doesn't have the capacity to digest or absorb any new information and retain it. So you need to be able to give yourself that 5-10 minute break every hour. That's just an example. But to your point, we talked about physical fitness earlier. You listen to all the power lifters, professional bodybuilders, or fitness professionals. They all tell you the same thing. You can work out hardcore for 5-6 days a week, but you have to have a full rest day in there. You have to allow your body to recover, or else your ability to grow will be capped, and you'll basically stall. And that's what we're talking about here when it comes to this topic of burnout. Is if you don't allow yourself to rest adequately, you are going to stall. You will not grow in any shape or form, mentally, emotionally, at work, at home. You're just not going to be able to push yourself and continue to evolve in the way that you hope to, because your body just physically can't do it. So rest, I would argue, is just as important as the work itself or the productivity that you're trying to achieve itself.
And vacations are not medicine for burnouts. Too many people live their life chasing the next vacation. Oh, I got to wait 6 months to my next vacation. Can't wait to that next vacation. Well, if you're somebody who's always chasing the next vacation, you are likely on a path to burnout.
Mm-hmm.
How do you fix that? Well, back to the schedule, right? We talked about planning time. This is something my wife and I started practicing many years ago, much harder with a little kid. But we would plan a vacation, I'll use that term, or a trip once a quarter, where we knew no matter what, we were going to go somewhere. And that doesn't mean you have to live this like glamorous lifestyle and a bunch of luxury. We weren't spending, $50,000 a year on vacations, but maybe we would drive a couple hours to somewhere, just a quick car ride, right? Maybe we drive an hour somewhere. Maybe we would spend a little bit of money and plan a big trip. But to your point, that rest, that intentional rest that's already scheduled is really, really, really important. And if you're somebody who's chasing that rest in the form of vacations because you work too hard, too much, too fast, you're on a downhill spiral, likely to burn yourself out.
Yeah, Brian. So when I think about that, I think about the idea of recovery and what that really means. And I think it's important that we acknowledge recovery without change is just a temporary refill. It's just a Band-Aid over an open wound, so to speak. If you're not changing the habits that have led you to this point of exhaustion, if you're not making the daily changes to your schedule or your workflow or your responsibilities, and you're just telling yourself that I'll just take this temporary time to reset, quote, so to speak, and maybe go on that vacation, I'll come back and I'll just go back to the same way of doing things. Well, again, it's just a temporary refill. You're never going to allow yourself to reach that moment where you can recharge and reset and truly grow. So I think it's important that when we talk about a true reset or recovery, part of that is changing your habits and changing the things in your schedule or your daily life that is leading you to the burnout. Now, certain things that you can't remove fully. Most people depend on an income. You have a job, of course, our family, our kids at home, those factors. But I think it's important that you really figure out how to really define how you spend your time and energy in those responsibilities and those roles. So that way you can effectively manage your energy in a way that you don't allow yourself to get to that point of burnout.
Yeah, if you don't change those conditions, Cody, the cycle's just going to keep starting over and over and over again. And you're going to end up being on that hamster wheel where you come back from work, you got your little recharge, you went on your vacation, whatever it is. You feel amazing. You're excited about life again. You're happy at work. Your productivity is really high. And a week later, you feel exactly.
It goes away.
And it's, yeah, a week later, you're right back to who you were. Being burnt out, chasing the next vacation, right? So changing those conditions, I think, is a key for not getting on that hamster wheel, not getting into that cycle. Well, let's transition over to the listener challenge here, right? If you're a listener listening to this show right now, watching this show, and you're experiencing burnout, you're feeling that burnout, maybe you just fell into it, maybe you've been burnt out for quite some time. What are some questions the listener can start asking themselves to help themselves realize what area in life they're burned out in and how they can get out of it?
Well, for me, the first thing is asking the question, what is draining me the most right now? And that's really doing a objective evaluation of, again, your time, your schedule, the things that you spend the most energy on, and define it and understand what is taking the most energy out of you. Is it the job? And sometimes that's a reflection point for people as well, is if you realize that, man, my job is just really sucking the life out of me and I just can't give any more.
Time for a new job.
Time for a new job. And maybe that might be your way of telling yourself, I need to make a new career change.
Sure.
And sometimes that's hard. I understand it's not just that easy, but how important is your mental health to you? How important is your physical health to you? How important are the people around you? And they deserve the best version of you. So first question I would ask anybody is, or myself is, what is draining me the most right now? And really narrow down into focusing in on those areas.
The second thing for our listeners, our challenge for this episode is to ask yourself, what is one thing I can start saying no to, or one thing I can delegate to somebody else in my life? Removing that one thing, even though it may not be the one thing that is actually burning you out on a weekly basis or a daily basis, starts to relieve some of the stress and anxiety and the burden and the pressure you might be feeling that could be causing you to feel burnt out. So if you're listening, I would encourage everyone to stop, write down all the things you're doing on a weekly basis, look at it and say, what can I start saying no to, or what can I delegate to somebody else?
So Brian, to close out, I think it's important that for us to recognize and acknowledge that there are going to be seasons in life where we're required to push through. There are going to be those times that require us to just kind of muscle through, so to speak, and really get through whatever circumstance we're in. But a sign of maturity is recognizing or knowing when pushing harder is making it much worse or making you much worse at things that you're trying to protect. So I think it's important that we be able to understand when we're getting to that breaking point and make sure that we're listening to our bodies, our mind, when we're starting to see those signs, and be able to say, you know what, time for me to take a break, time for me to step back and take that recharge.
As men, we're natural born protectors. Even at young ages, we're protecting ourselves. We're protecting our siblings. As adults, we protect our families. We protect our peers and our friends in our close circle. So if we're not fully recharged, if we're constantly being burned out, we can't protect those around us like we are supposed to our highest level. So I think that's a message to the audience. A good ending note for today's show is don't let yourself get to the point of being burnt out. If you do get burnt out, get out of it as quickly as you can. Follow some of the steps we talked about here today, because if you're going to be the best version of yourself and be the best man you can be for those around you, you can't let yourself get burnt out. Otherwise, you're putting your family, your job, everyone else around you in a position where they're not going to see the best version of you, and you're not going to be able to protect them like you should.
Appreciate you being here with us. Stay connected by joining our weekly newsletter called The Forge, delivered straight to your inbox with thoughts on business, work, family, and becoming a better man. Make sure to check out forgingbettermen.com to sign up. If this show hits home for you, then hit the follow button and leave us a review to help us reach more guys who would benefit from it. This is Under Pressure.